All of us are likely to have a connection with Jono somehow, whether it's through work, family, faith, friends. But maybe, however, learning about his poetry and his writing may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, seeing a side of him that maybe you didn't know. I think Jono is also aware that he may be revealing more of himself to you than you would have known about him before. I did know about Jono's writing and his creativity for some time, but I was surprised by this book. I've got to say, I was surprised by this book, and the book really speaks to me. There's flashes of life, garnished, if you like, with insights. I like that kind of stuff. And one remarkable thing about Jono's writing, for me, is his honesty. Nothing is filtered out in what Jono covers in his search for meaning. He searches for the truth behind every moment. And I could see myself in what he wrote, and it made me feel connected. And his insights and the things he touches on are so expansive and free-ranging and still recognisable as part of everyday life. So I found myself saying, when I was reading, I know that feeling. I know that moment. I recognised myself in the moments that Jono shared. So if you do not know much about Jono's poetry, you are in for a treat. He uses a form called haibun, and we will hear more about that from else later. But you will see that Jono finds depth in the most ordinary and everyday things, as well as sharing flashes from his own reading and from his travel and his connections. And when I think of Jono and his book, I think of a famous quote I heard many years ago from Claude Bernard, and it really hit me. And he said, "We achieve more than we know. We know more than we understand. And we understand more than we can explain." I tell you, Jono comes pretty close to catching the words that explain some of the deep mysteries of ourselves. And I believe Jono shows this quote to be true of himself, certainly, and even true of all of us in a way. So we do not have to exclude ourselves from a life of searching and insight, no matter what our circumstances. We can also all be a part of that great conversation that has been going on since humans stood up and began to communicate and share about life, the universe and everything. We can all be part of that. So now, in the spirit of that sense of continuity, I want to acknowledge the deep history and the mystery of the land on which we gather, to acknowledge the generations of care by this land's people, of the Wongal people, past and present, and who invite us to share in the care of country under the dark evening in our starry skies. So we thank them, and we continue with our own search for meaning and grasping our life. So, on to the launch. What we're going to do is firstly, to listen to Else give a bit of an explanation of the haibun form, if you're not familiar with it, so that we can better appreciate the works that we're going to hear. Then we'll listen to Jono in his own voice share some of the haibun. Then just after that, I'm going to sit down with him and I'm going to interview Jono, dig deeper in what's going on for him and the book. Then finally, we have a special treat. We're going to listen to a music and poetry collaboration between Jono and Jim Beattie in order to experience the works even more deeply. This is experimental, it's creative. In fact, Jim's music, this is a world launch. So what you're about to hear has never been publicly shared. World premiere. World premiere So we're in auspicious, and the whole thing, John will explain more, but an immersive experience of these words and this music and this silence. So now, first up, I call on Els to speak to us about the hybrid form of poetry.
First of all, I just want to thank you all on behalf of Jono and our family for gathering together to honour this incredible achievement. It has been impressive watching Jono pull this collection together with his incredible discipline and focus and attention to detail. And it's just lovely to be here together and honour that achievement with all of you. And so Jono's asked me to say a few words briefly explaining what haibun is, so to frame your understanding of what he's doing in this collection. So haiku and haibun are traditional Japanese poetry forms that have really influenced our writing practice and been actually a significant part of our relationship as well. We initially bonded over this common interest, and now we both share our creative journeys in these forms together and read each other's work and feed off each other quite a lot, so it's quite special. In a nutshell, a haibun is a short piece of prose with a haiku on the end. So I feel like I can't really explain haibun without talking a bit about haiku first. So most of you will already be familiar with traditional definitions of Japanese haiku, which is a brief poem with a seasonal nature image, a set syllable count, which is somehow related, perhaps a bit elusively, to the human condition. So in English, we've deviated a little bit over the years. So since the 70s, writers of haiku in English have taken a few different approaches to the form, and there's a few reasons for that, which we justify that with, one of which is that, so you'll know there's a syllable count in traditional haiku, 17 syllables, but the equivalent in the Japanese language is a unit of speech called an on, which is actually shorter and more succinct and more uniform than English syllables are. So to retain the feel and the amount said and the light touch of a haiku, English language poets have adopted some flexibility around structure and syllable count, while retaining the essence of what a haiku can do and can say. So basically expressing what some people call the haiku moment, or an aha moment, where there's a moment in time and space where something in the everyday strikes the poet with a feeling of resonance about the deeper condition of being human in this world, and you have a feeling of an insight or a meaning in the mystery of the particular. So it's just something that you've spotted in the world, and somehow you get one of those moments of, oh, that speaks to me. I feel all human somehow. And you want to show that, but not explain it overly, not tell, just show it. And then the reader maybe will have their own sense of connection with that moment, or maybe they'll see exactly what you were thinking. Or you bring your own experience as a reader to a haiku. Another necessary adaptation that Western writers have made in adopting haiku into our cultural landscape relates to the seasonal references. So Japanese poets traditionally had whole lists of season words that had culturally understood meanings and associations that they would draw on, and all their readership understood cherry blossoms means such and such, or whatever it may be, light rain means such and such. So these don't always speak to us in the same ways, obviously. So as we write in our various landscapes and cultural contexts in English, we can find ways to incorporate a seasonal reference that our own readership will understand. And I've got a favourite example, which is from one of Jono's haiku. It goes like this. Morning rush, waiting for the honey to run. So the seasonal reference is in the fact that the cooler weather makes the honey quicker. It's winter. And the idea of honey running also connects in a surprising way to the idea of being in a rush from the poem's first line. Morning rush, waiting for the honey to run. Also, we notice that the poet is slowed down by the moment of waiting for the honey, and so the reader is drawn into this human moment by a disjunction. And here it's the disjunction between the rush and the waiting. So this is another feature of haiku, that typically a haiku will have two parts to it, and there is a natural feeling of a break that has actually been crafted into it, which provides a moment of shift within the poem that creates that space for the reader to bring their own sense of the meaning or the resonance into that. So there's both a break and moment of connection, and we call this link and shift. So a haiban is a short piece of prose with a haiku at the end, or sometimes a haiku or two might be interspersed through the prose. And the form was developed and named by the celebrated classic Japanese poet Basho, who used it to describe what he was doing in his travel journals. So he had passages describing his travels and his reflections with a haiku that was linked. And the relationship of the haiku to the prose can seem quite subtle, but we have link and a shift here again between the parts. So the reader should again feel a shift and a link that might seem ambiguous or mysterious, but which hopefully invites rereading to better grasp what is the dialogue between the bit of prose and this haiku, what's happening here. So the interplay between them is more than the sum of the parts. And the reader is invited to sit in that space and feel both the disjunction and the marriage between the prose and the little haiku, and to find their own sense of what is being said underneath the words, what's maybe unsayable, but it's there, and we can relate because we're all human. So certainly that's what I hope you'll do as you read Jono's book. Take some time, reread the ones that strike you, sit in that space of what is this link between the prose and the haiku, and enjoy it. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand you back over to Rob.
With that insight and that attitude of listening and looking for the disjunction, looking for the message, looking for the insight, looking for the connection, I invite Jono to come and share a few light thoughts with us.
Thanks everyone for coming, and I'd like to thank St John's as well for letting us use this the space and the facilities, and for all the people, including my children who are serving behind the bar, and for Jake who spontaneously showed up with his film equipment. I just wanted to do a couple of readings to start with. The first one is a haiban from my book. It's called Bethel, and the reason I chose this one is because this St John's ground actually features in the haiban. And the second one I'm going to read is one else's haiban. I didn't tell that I was going to do this. Do I have consent? Which also features in this. Are you happy for me to read darkly?
Surprise. Long time.
Okay, I was going to find where the page was. The title is Bethel, which means House of God. He took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar. Genesis 28:18. Today I serviced an elderly widow's toilet and taps. She made me instant coffee served with plain Arnott's biscuits. I made conversation. In broken English, she told me how she and her husband had come from Sicily to Sydney to give the children a better life. Her daughter is married now, living in Queensland. Her son somewhere in Germany. Over the years, the neighbourhood has changed so much, she no longer knows anyone in the street. No one cares, she said, voice quavering. Abandoned quarry. The fig tree silently splitting a rock. Afterwards, I ate my lunch in the shade of a large palm tree in the grounds of a nearby church. Despite signs of dilapidation, the toppled gravestones and the root-buckled paths, there was evidence of care. The inviting lawns seemed well kept. The old stone church had withstood the test of time. Leaving, I paused a moment where two paths crisscrossing the grounds intersect in front of the entrance to the church. The worn-down old stone steps and door sill remain. giving moss a place to gather, gully stones. And now I'm reading from one of Elsa's Hyman. She also is an internationally published poet. And in fact, I have to say that my sense of the haiku and Hyman forms has been refined by Elsa's sensibility more than anyone else, I would say. This Hyman is called Darkly. Still adjusting to the bite in the night air, in the early dark, I'm wearing a coat I bought at a charity shop only weeks ago, and my arms are folded, holding myself. Old gravestones, lounging at angles in the grass, flank my trajectory towards the church. The stained glass windows, lit from within, seem to float out of the dark, a tempting bourne, a kind of promise. I know the doors are wide open. I know that people will smile when I enter. It's only my pride which has seen me struggling to find a way in for weeks on end. The other side of the frosted glass, the shape of a moth. I think we're going to have an interview now. Joseph's going to interview me.
Yes, you are. Jono's going to hang on to the microphone. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. If you can't hear me, let me know and I'll grab the mic. Most people here know at least something about you. Can you tell us a bit of your story, and in particular, how writing became part of your life?
Yes, I do talk a little bit about how the writing became a part of my life in the afterword to my book, which I deliberately put at the end of my book because I get annoyed at books that have massive introductions and prefaces that you start reading that and then you never actually get to the book. Especially if it's a boring or introduction, you never know what the book is going to be like. So just get into the book and then I can give my little talk about the book at the end. I never really knew exactly that I was going to be a writer of any description. In fact, I never really set out initially to become a writer, although I did occasionally write poetry, like poems and things like that. And I appreciated poetry. I remember reading my AA when we were 6, when I was very young. I can still remember some of those by heart. But I guess I settled into I had kind of ambitions, I guess you'd say, to write as I sort of got older, and I tried to imagine myself as being someone who would perhaps write a novel or something like that, or some kind of book of some kind, but I didn't really know what that would be. I remember having many occasions where I'd have these inspirational ideas and I'd start to write something, and then the nature of my life with work just meant that it would get interrupted by something, or some event would come up and I'd put it on the back burner and then I'd come back to it, a couple of weeks later or whenever I got the next chance. And by then the whole moment is gone, the whole inspiration, all the impetus is sort of just, all the wind just sort of went out of my sails repeatedly. And I had that experience so many times, I almost despaired of writing at all. and I just thought I should just give up this foolish sort of dream. But then I had the thought that I should try just writing something smaller, just something more manageable. And so I started writing poems again. And, initially I worked with forms like sonnets because I found that it just gave some kind of structure. And when I worked within a preset form, I found what was interesting is that it would shift me out of my normal way of talking about something or speaking about something and make me think differently. So in order to fit into a sonnet form, you would have to sort of somehow reshape your own words, and quite often you'd end up hitting on a different idea altogether, or a different thought, or a different sentiment. And it would change. So I found it a really creative process working within a form. And haiku, of course, was like an even more concise form again, and that sort of really challenged me a lot. But it was also kind of easy because I could do it while I was driving or while I was walking, or sometimes haiku would just come to me, fully formed. Or other times but you didn't have to be sitting at a computer or writing away or anything like that. It could all just be done in your mind while you're walking, while you're active, while you're working. And so I found that I was actually starting to write a lot more when I had this smaller form. So in a sense, I think that the form chose me because of the nature of my lifestyle. It wasn't really that I set out and said, because what I was setting out to do was something different. But and even how I came across haiku was through another friend who's not here tonight, but Andy McKeown, who took the photo of the cover for me. He, after I had a hernia operation, I was convalescing, and he sent me this little haiku text, and I sort of didn't know what a haiku was really, had a very vague idea, and so I asked him what is it, how does haiku, how do they work? And so I started then responding to him by text in haiku form to the best of my ability. At that stage it was pretty crude. It was just like this 5-7-5 syllable. But it didn't really have any of the haiku sensibilities. But that was my first way of doing it. And I kind of liked it. I kind of got addicted to it, even though they were really bad haiku that I was writing. Else soon pointed that out to me. She was very gracious about it, but I can read between the lines.
And then Hyben as well, didn't you,
Well, Hyben, yeah. Once I started working with the haiku form, and I even started submitting to journals and got rejected so many times because I obviously hadn't quite got the haiku thing. But I loved reading them too. They were sort of like these Moorish little morsels that you could just, you could read a whole book of haiku. Whereas if it was one big long poem, you'd sort of get 2 pages in and think, this is too much hard work. But haiku, you can have one. It's like Homer Simpson and beer, then you just want to drink another beer, like Jimmy and me.
Yeah, Jim.
So the haiku, the prose just gave me a little bit more latitude to write, because I did feel a little bit frustrated by the overly compressed form. That you just couldn't really open up too much within that form. So the Hyben just gave that little bit of prose, just eased it to sort of loosens the whole experience. And I think it gives people it makes the poetry also very accessible, rather than everything that's written in verse or in some kind of very dense style. So yeah, so that's kind of how I sort of grew into the form, if you like.
certainly I relate to the accessibility. That's what just made it so connected for me. We did hear about from else about the hymen, and you started to tell us a little bit how you connected to these forms. But what happens for you from the moment, say, of inspiration to the moment of completeness?
Joseph and I have talked about these questions before, so
I'm trying to make it sound expert.
and some of them have been stolen from Natasha.
So this is all scripted, is it?
I certainly hope not. I wouldn't be rambling around so much.
I'm scripted, he's free.
I'm going to read a little hymen called Pocketknife as a way of sort of being able to talk to that question. So this one's called Pocketknife, and there's a little epigraph there that says, "Never more than today has he made his presence felt by being absent." It's a quote from Thomas Merton. I found it in the screen beside the walking track at News on the back way up to the glowworm tunnel from the strange ruins of the old shale oil quarry. It stayed with me 2 or 3 years until it was confiscated by security at Bangkok Airport. I forgot it was in the day pack I was carrying, too late by then. The official said it would be destroyed, but I find it hard to believe someone could throw something like that into a furnace. 10 years have passed since then, but still, from time to time, something reminds me. I find myself wondering where it is now, gilding the curves of the railway tracks. Winter sunlight. So that was a hymen that I wrote. And I usually, most of my best hymen, I think, start from a haiku. Like the haiku is the foundation or the anchor point for it. And with that haiku, it initially emerged just because I often walk near, railway lines and train tracks and things. And I often do my walking early in the morning. And so I found just a strange aesthetic pleasure looking at tracks and seeing the shine on the track lines and just curving off into the distance or around the bend or something like that. And I tried for ages to write a haiku about it, and I just didn't really get it. But then one day it just sort of like came to me, and I captured that little haiku, gilding the curves. That was the word, gilding. That I think brought it all together for me. While I was looking at these gilded track lines in the winter sunlight, I found myself just having this kind of reverie. And I think it was partly because of the track lines going off into the distance that it made me start thinking of travel. And then I found myself just remembering, I don't know where it came from, but I remembered this pocket knife that I'd had that I lost at Bangkok Airport. And the two sort of came together, and I realised that I had a hymen then. And then I went back, and it was one that I wrote very quickly once the idea was there. It was just very, very straightforward. So for me, that's normally how it works, although not always. There are times where I do just have a prose idea first, and then I'll find a haiku, or I'll write a haiku, or I'll have to wait for a haiku to come and something else. But the best ones, I think, are sort of constructed around an anchoring haiku.
Thanks. Look, at the end, I'm going to invite anyone that wants to ask John a question. I've just got a couple of questions less, but what I'm interested to hear more about is the book itself, and in particular, how did this book come about?
When I after I started writing Hyben, and I'd sort of developed into the Hyben form, and I started favouring that as my preferred form, even over haiku, although haiku was still integral to that form. I still had this kind of ambition to write a book of some kind, not just because I'd been just publishing, individual haiku, sending them off to journals and things like that, and you get one published here or a couple published there, and it was all just sort of scattered all over the place. And so I did have this kind of desire to move towards a whole composition or a whole book of my own poetry that I could publish. And so I set myself a kind of project. I had this this concept of Genesis, this is over 10 years ago when I first came up with the title and the concept for the book. And basically the concept was that it would be a book of Hyben called Genesis, and each Hyben would have an epigraph at the start with a quote from the book of Genesis, from the Bible, the first book of the Bible, which is a book that I really love and that has just such amazing stories that I just get so much rich insight from. And so I thought it would give just a kind of another level of depth and resonance to the more immediate Hyben about my own life and experiences and things like that. And so I started trying to write Hyben to fit into this concept of this book, and everyone would have a little thing, and I'd be trying to, but it just became too restrictive after a while. I found it really frustrating, and I'd end up trying to sort of mangle haiku or massage them into this form in order to get my book written, kind of thing. And so after a while, I just sort of gave up on it. I'm not going to give up on it exactly, but I'm just going to start writing. If there are some that come that fit that form, I'll stick them in the book, and if not, I'll just publish them separately. And of course, I didn't tend to find that any of my Hyben fitted the book form, so I kind of just abandoned it. But I did try to publish collections of books under another title. Like one of them I put together for a competition through Snapshot Book Awards, I think it's called. Snapshot Press Book Awards and e-book awards. So there was a couple of competitions, and they had very, very specific criteria as well. It has to be so many words, and not more than this many lines, and a few other sort of criteria like that. So I had to go through all my Hyben and start chopping, and which was a good part of the process, because it meant that I had to rework everything and try and, in order to make it fit the criteria to be eligible for these competitions. And I submitted to about 6 of those over a 3 or 4 year period, and never got accepted. And the ones that did get accepted, I always thought were crappy. I always thought mine were much better, at least, put it that way. But once again, when I kept getting rejected from those, I sort of began to despair again. So I kind of just put it all on the back burner, and until lockdown started, and I just thought I should just try and so I've got all this stuff there. I'm not writing much at the moment because we've moved house, and there was a number of interruptions, just disrupted my whole routine. And so I decided to just try and pull a collection together, and I sent it off to an editor, a publisher who is a very influential publisher in the haiku Japanese form sort of world, Hyben world. Just to find out how much it costs. I had no idea. So, and I was surprised that I thought it's actually within my budget. And so I sent him this collection that I put together for this other competition, which I did think had a kind of overall integrity. But he came back with me and said, it's fine, it's completely up to you. But there are 2 kinds of books you can write in Highland, you can either do like as an anthology, you can either do a kind of a greatest hits, which you just put all your best poems in, and then publish that, or you can sort of try and give it some overall, give it an argument or an angle or an integrity or a concept or something like that that gives the whole thing. And I tried to sort of convince him that my initial submission to him had that kind of stuff, but he says, "Oh no, I think it's up to you, but see what you can come up with." So I went back and I remembered this Genesis concept, and so I put it to him. I said, "Well, I had this concept ages ago." He said, "Well, I actually like it." So I thought, well, I'll try and rethink, go back through all my Highland and see if it does actually work. And the book is basically the product of that process, just going back through 10 years of the Highland and the haiku and writing that I've done.
Is there a Highland that realises that too?
Well, the original title piece was actually called Genesis, but I've changed the title of it in this book to Windhover. Windhover. Once again, I've forgotten to write down the page numbers. I don't know where this is. 51. Is that not Jimmy talking? So, and this I felt had strangely the real sort of essence of Genesis to it, and as I said before, it was originally the title of this one, which is now called Windhover. The earth then was welter and waste, and darkness over the deep, and God's breath hovering. Genesis 1:1. Desolate, in the mountains by myself, in that house I rented in the same town, as if I was the only person left on earth, and the only thing I could think about was her, out there somewhere. For months I consoled myself by performing the rites alone, the cigarettes, the joints, the last vestiges of the sacraments of our 60s. Every night just smoking, staring at the fire, trying to see a future or a way back, to somehow escape the dungeon of my life. Life. It wasn't life. But I was stubborn, like a sulky child. That's where perdition begins, clinging to a corpse of used to be, refusing to be consoled by anything else. The sickness of the dead that don't yet know it. Eventually it affects your mind, the morbid logic. That's when I started ideating, So what happened? I mean, evidently you didn't, A strange thought, more like a voice, well entered, but quiet. Like Gerard Manley Hopkins muttering, indistinguishable from the fire. Those blue bleak embers, fall, gall themselves and gash gold vermilion. No matter how hopeless my life seemed, and though I couldn't believe, I couldn't actually once and for all deny the possibility, the hope, I suppose, of a good beyond that of my own monotonous desire. Do you know what I mean? If possibility existed, tomorrow, next year, who knows? In a certain respect, it's easy to deny, but somehow, dead wood, the ministry of wind.
Beginnings and ends, I just think it's really thank you. In the haiku form, we heard else talking about seasonality, natural cycles and so on. But we're all modern people, we're all in the Westies, we live in a technological world.
Not all in the Westies. I've got some of my old schoolmates here.
So, is this relevant to us in the modern people?
I guess one of the things about haiku and haiban, particularly the seasonality or seasonal references that they include, or some kind of nature connection, I think really fitted with my personality anyway. I've always loved the natural world, and I think most people do in some sense. And so those forms just helped me sort of really focus that a little bit more and to start noticing and bothering to go the next step and write something about it. Because as you rightly say, you know, we live in a world that's increasingly technologically mediated, so we don't really have a very direct relationship with the natural world or the creation, or however you want to think about it. And so the haiku discipline and the haiban discipline, I think, just brings you back to a focus on the world before human intervention and the way in which humans have shaped it to their own convenience to some extent. And to the extent, in fact, that they've almost forgotten the natural world. Like I remember there was some interview I heard, or some account of statistics that someone had done. Someone had done some survey or something of school children in Australia and asked them, I can't remember what the percentages were now, where questions like, where does milk come from? And it was surprising how many thought that it came from the supermarket. little things like that. Just shows you how easily it is when people grow up in a highly built environment, that they take that as their primary world, and yet there is these seasonal cycles that are going on in the background that are almost invisible. We don't even notice the moon, for example, which is a very important image in haiku. We rarely notice, we're rarely in touch with the actual progressive phases of the moon cycle. Some people more than others, obviously, but most of us are so busy and so inside at night, so fixated with Netflix or whatever, that we don't really pay much attention and stay connected to those things. So for me, I think that they are really important connections to maintain, and for me, haiku, it's one of the most beautiful things about it for me, and why it really grounds me in the natural world and in an appreciation of creation. I thought I might even read one called Sphinx, which is a strange title. I came up with the title for a couple of reasons. I discovered that the etymology of the word spinica comes from sphinx, but there's no real understanding of why or how it came about, but apparently that's one of the speculative ideas that they have about spinicas. And you might be able to tell why spinicas...
1/7.
What is it?
Sphinx is on 1/7.
It's right at the start, isn't it? Right, yeah, please shout them out. No, it's not. 1/7 what?
170.
Oh, 170, sorry. I was so he was that close. Thanks, Hanson. Sphinx. Write in a book what you see. Apocalypse 1:11. That's the last book in the Bible. Fire too can harness the wind. These past weeks have seen the bulging spinnakers. the smell, the gauzy haze infused through everything. From Kirribilli I watched the stealthy veil envelop the city. On the far shore, the babel of buildings fade, confuse, vanish. The ferries in the quay, a Titanic cruise ship. By 10 o'clock, all engulfed. A foghorn sounds. In the smoke-dimmed tide, the opera house transforms. Instead of sails, pale hooded heads, monk-like, somewhere in sands of the desert, watching, praying. One dull, glowing, coal-like eye, a smoke-tarnished sunglint. The once optimistic parabola of the bridge falling to the shore of an anxious abyss. Dipping its nib in the ink of the creek. Summer swallow.
Jono, what about your faith and your work? How have these shaped your poetry?
Well, I thought I love this poem, "The Gravel Walks" by Seamus Heaney. And you'll notice in this poem, there's a kind of contrast between the sensibility of Seamus Heaney and that of Gabriel Proust, the French writer. So it's called Blue Blue. As you went stooping with your barrow full into an absolution of the body. For me, it's not so delicate or refined as a dainty piece of Madeline dipped in her decoction of lime blossom tea. It's the strong, distinct yet pleasant smell of what my father called blue blue, the solvent cement we use to join pipes and fittings made of PVC. Even today, absorbed in the work at hand, a half-oblivious whiff did the trick, wafting over from the apprentice repairing the stormwater service at the top of the steep driveway of a house in Church Point. I stood gazing down toward the yachts in the marina, but I was looking down the vista of memory, the mound of blue metal, the wheelbarrow and shovel, the earth-heaped banks of trenches and bridges of planks, and me trying to keep up with my father laying a run of pipe. The whole vivid grey bleak scene opened up before me, the half-built house in a clearing of trees out the back of Portland somewhere, and Dad and me working against the light and rain to be home for the weekend. I'd be exaggerating to make it seem the vast structure of recollection to which that smell is key, were accessible only by heroic labours of poetic subtlety a la Proust, sipping his cup of tea in search of lost time. Some men's minds so utterly are in their bodies, their hands, their tools. Sleet-stinging drizzle, the shove of the spade in the pipe bed of gravel. So I read that poem because one of the things, I guess, about my life is that I'm just my writing is really a hobby. It's not what I do for a living. I'm a plumber, and I come from I don't know whether my family actually turned up in the end of that. No. Luke's here. There you go.
Yes,
Luke was my entry point, or one of my main serious entry points into plumbing. I come from a long line of plumbers. I'm a third generation plumber. so my dad was a plumber, obviously, and his dad was a plumber as well. And both my brothers are plumbers, although Luke's retired early. But I still fortunately or unfortunately, I'm plumbing for most of the time. And it's a very physical trade, and it's one that really confronts you with the grittier side of human existence. And so we tend to get up close and personal in people's business. But the interesting thing for me is that one of the reasons why I've stayed with plumbing is partly just because of a back injury that I had when I was quite young. And so for me, one of the worst things is sitting at a computer or sitting in an office. You would think that with a back injury that physical work would be harder, but in fact I find that continually exercising it and moving it, as long as I'm careful with it, means that it's always mobile, and so I'm much more sort of aware of it, and it's exercised, it's strengthened, and so on. But that's so that physical part of my life is really unusual. It's kind of been imposed on me because of my back condition as a kind of necessity. I need to do it. Most naturally, I'm a kind of a Gnostic. I live in the realm of ideas, and I just want to sort of stay there and be sheltered from all the you know the gritty stuff that you have to deal with in the real concrete world. You know, and so I found this weird tension between those two elements of my life, which over many years I've realised has been a kind of tension that I've been trying to hold together in myself, and I'm the kind of synthesis that's the result of both this kind of active, imaginative, mental life and this quite intense physical work that I do. And I see that as kind of the process of actually becoming the self that I am, that we have to work out, all of us, some kind of a synthesis between our mental life and our physical part of our being as well, and the physical world itself. And so for me, that's kind of part of the process, and for me it's a spiritual process as well. Like I do that obviously, not obviously necessarily, but my philosophical and my theological reflections are a part of that, and my genuine sort of sense of trying to work out who I am and what is my purpose in being in this world, and how do I bring all the things that I am, humble as they are, like broken as they are, with my, like I had a fragmented T9 vertebrae when I was in my early 20s, and that's kind of stayed with me ever since. It's just a thing that I have to manage now. Not shattered or anything, but it's so I guess it's just worked out. I've just tried to work through those constraints and those limitations of my physical life. Of course, the mental life is almost infinite. It has no constraints. So holding that freedom and that necessity together in the process of relating the psychic and the physical, I think has been part of my spiritual journey.
What about your spiritual journey? What about connections with others? Do you see poetry connecting with readers? What happens to in the inner self when poetry is shared and felt? Connect.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I actually have a quote here that I wanted to read, which I think is a really apt description. Sorry, my glasses. So once again, it's a quote from Thomas Merton. That was one at the start. He says that in poetry, words are charged with meaning in a far different way than are the words in a piece of scientific prose. the words of a poem are not merely the signs of concepts. They are also rich in affective and spiritual associations. The poet uses words not merely to make declarations, statements of fact. That is usually the last thing that concerns him. He seeks above all to put words together in such a way that they exercise a mysterious and vital reactivity among themselves, and so release their secret content of associations to produce in the reader an experience that enriches the depths of his spirit or her spirit in a manner quite unique. A good poem induces an experience that could not be produced by any other combination of words. What the poem actually means can only be summed up in the whole content of poetic experience, which is capable of producing in the reader. So the Haydn haiku form, as Els sort of explained initially, has this disjunctive or shifted structure to it, which makes room, I think, for readers to be able to bridge the gap and make a connection. It's kind of like, I think of it sometimes like a battery where there's a cathode and an anode, I think it is, and once there's a connection made between them, it starts a current flowing, and that can power things, and it can power an imagination. So I think that the two disparate elements within a haiku, or the disparate elements within Haydn, function that way. In a particular, it's their particular form. Other poems like, I mentioned Gerard Manley Hopkins before. He talks about his sprung verse. I think it releases a kind of series of associations in a different kind of way, using a different technique. But Haydn and haiku use this disjunctive structure, and it makes room for the reader, so that the reader has to participate in the poem in order for the magic of the poem to actually happen. So, and it gives the reader a kind of a sudden insight or a sudden moment when they make their own connection between the two, or more elements. In fact, I think we're going to go to our final piece soon, and Jim Beattie is going to. We're going to be using a piece of his music, or we collaborated together on this. Jim, I was driving along one day, and I hadn't seen Jim for a few years, I think, and saw him walking on the side of the road, and I pulled over and we started talking, and I told him about my book, and I said and he said he was going to get a copy or something like that, and he said, I'll send you some of my music. And so he emailed me a bunch of files, and I started listening to them. And one piece in particular I thought was really suitable for a kind of collaboration. So you're all going to experience the premiere of not only the premiere of Jim's music, but of this piece that we've put together, which will include 3 readings of mine. But there's another form called haiga in the Japanese tradition, which uses an image. It's kind of like a meme in a way, but it has a haiku with an image of some kind. Traditionally, it was like ink paintings that the Japanese used to do, or still do. But I thought we could actually extend this same concept into music and have another sort of shift again into a musical form. So in a way, within this Japanese tradition, I'm not aware of anyone having done something like this. I mean, there's been poems read with musical backing, but I meant this. I think we mean this to be a bit more than that. It's got its own kind of life in the connections between the music and the poems that are going to be read.
Let's do it then. I'll bring the lectern across,
Yeah.
and then we'll...
There's 3 minutes of just the music before the first reading happens, so please do.
Get a drink.
If you're really thirsty, you'll get a drink. But just settle down, enjoy the music, go with it, see what it evokes for you, and don't be alarmed if nothing happens for 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now, are you going to read from there?
Yeah, I'll read from
Have you got these papers? Page nothing? I've got them here from there.
Maybe while they're doing that, I could just say a quick word. You'll notice that sometimes there'll be sound coming only from one side and sometimes from the other, and sometimes together. I think if this screen works okay, you'll see a little blurb explaining what's going on, but just in a nutshell, it's supposed to be a dialogue between two very different lyre birds, and the piece is called Lyre Line.
Penicillin when doctors asked if I had allergies, without the slightest inkling or curiosity. I first began to wonder when I noticed those magical-looking red and white spotted ones, the same that used to pop up beneath the row of old pine trees at our farm, growing miles away in the mountains beneath a similar row of trees. And this old guy at church, Doc Aberdeen, I thought he was just a normal kind of doctor, even after I went to his home. Paintings of all kinds of bizarre and brightly coloured fungi were hung on every wall. My wife paints it's these, he said, when he noticed me looking. Even so, it wasn't till his funeral that I learned he was a doctor of mycology, that his wife used to illustrate specimens he collected, that he'd been hospitalised several times after sampling minute quantities. Mushroom picking. Something about his mother he never knew. Thin in itself, I hid myself. Genesis 3:10. His little face was there in the big window of the childcare centre, peering down over the sill at the outside world. I waved as I drove into the car park, though he probably couldn't see me through reflections in my windscreen. His impassive face, like a flower, followed my car, stopping where it stopped. Parked, I wound down my window and, noticing he was looking, waved again. For a split second, I thought I discerned an almost imperceptible retraction in that little being, and instinctively looked away, not wanting to shatter, as it were, the fourth wall of one not yet ready to be seen. Tarnishing reflections on a reed-sheltered pond, autumn zephyr. Kingdom of the heavens. In a remote area of the Butterwing Ranges, I stopped for a drink of water and noticed a small wildflower quivering in the heath. With nothing demanding my attention, I give it to the little flower and wonder, out here, has anyone ever noticed its existence? Above the flicker of firelight in the trees, countless twinkling stars.
Very much for that creative, innovative, experimental experience. I think it was great, and I think we've come now to the end of the launch.
But thank you all for coming and listening. I hope it was enjoyable and not too Thank you, Joseph, for letting me use your music and for participating in this. And to my lovely wife once again for her. If you do want books. They're over here, and I'm happy to sign them at some point. Whether I can think of anything to say. I can still write my name.
John, is there a time that we can go?